Gold smuggling, which had almost disappeared from the lexicon of Indian customs after the economic liberalization started during the 1990s, had made a comeback during the last year, mainly because of the tariff barriers that were brought up by the government. These were in response to the CAD crisis, which necessitated a quantitative restriction on the import of gold as well as the erection of a tariff barrier. So the duty of gold was hiked up to 10% for primary gold, and there was also a linking of the imports to the exports, which means that the total quantity of gold that could be legally brought into the country came down. This was the reason why smuggling staged a comeback.
In fact, Kochi airport has emerged as the latest gold route. It has often hit the headlines for repeated incidents of seizure of smuggled gold.
It reminds one of the 70s, the favorite storyline of many a Bollywood movie, where the underworld kingpin indulges in gold smuggling to get rich fast. Over 100 kilograms of gold has been seized in Kerala airports in the last 6 months. And it is anybody's guess as to how much more has been brought in undetected. Investigations indicate that at least 50 kilograms has been smuggled in by the racket led by kingpin TK Fayaz.
How big is the smuggling is something which we will not be able to say for sure, but one can have a rough estimate of the volumes involved when you see that generally the quantum of gold that India needs on an average is around 60 tons per month. So what could not be bet by the legal import, there will always be a tendency for operators to move in through the illicit channels. After the liberalization, when import of gold was freely permitted, at most of the times the gold price in India and Dubai were almost at par. But after the tariff barriers came back, we find that there's a differential, and it's a differential that shows the extent of margins that a smuggler or a person who illicitly moves gold between countries stands to gain from this operation.
There has been a phenomenal increase in the flow of gold through legal and illegal channels by passengers from Gulf countries. And this airport has become the proverbial melting point.
The first step towards curbing smuggling is to develop intelligence about the movement of smugglers, the movement of carriers, and to have a machinery in place to intercept them, identify them, examine them, and to recover the contraband. The department has been successful in doing this, as could be seen from the fact that in the state of Kerala itself we have gold seizures of almost 150 kgs during the last 7-8 months. There have been seizures reported in all other parts of the country as well. But there is always a need to be constantly on the vigil, and the officers also are required to do their duties with due diligence to ensure that there are no complaints coming in and that there are no instances where anyone knowingly or unknowingly tries to help or facilitates the movement of a smuggler or a carrier bringing in gold.
Over the years, the techniques have gotten more suave and the smugglers have found ways to trick investigators. Today, Indian gold smugglers are adopting the methods of drug couriers to sidestep a government crackdown on imports of the precious metal.
The permanent solution is, if it's a crime which is fashioned only for the reason of a tariff barrier and a quantitative restriction, would be to bring it down. But there are reasons for bringing in these restrictions and erecting the tariff barrier. So in the long run, one supposes that these barriers and restrictions would be brought down and smuggling would cease to be of any profit. Other than that, so long as there is a tariff barrier, there will be a tendency for people to get around that and to contravene and to move in the contraband illicitly.
Stashing gold in imported vehicles and even using mules who swallow nuggets to try to get them past airport security. Stung by rules imposed in 2013 to cut a high trade deficit and a record duty on imports, dealers and individual customers are fanning out across Asia to buy gold and sneak it back into the country.
Customs Department has been trying to check the flow of contraband in its own ways. Primarily, if you look at it, the smuggling can be through passengers coming through airports, to it can be concealed inside various gadgets, equipments, etc. that are sent from abroad, and 3, it can be smuggled across the sea. Now, mostly the smuggling that we have been seeing during the last 7-8 months has been through passengers who come through airports. There have been occasional cases of gold being concealed within baggage items which are sent by people working abroad.
In fact, Sri Lanka, Thailand and Singapore are the latest hotspots as authorities crack down on travellers from Dubai, the traditional source of smuggled gold.
The idea behind gold restriction was to keep a check on the foreign exchange reserves. That never happened. The idea behind liberalization was to ensure that smuggling goes down. But far from being a lucrative proposition, gold liberalization could hardly check smuggling of the yellow metal.
The demand for gold in India is very high. High enough for providers to try and bend the law and push smuggled gold into the country to satiate the demand. The racket is large and often has men and women from within the system backing it. The crackdown has begun. But despite the laws, the seizures, these smugglers have kept the business alive and kicking.